But if you were to look for that stuff, at least like read it knowing that, yeah, this is pretty good material. Beyond that, there's really not much. I mean, there's like a handful of people like me who post about this stuff on Twitter that might be useful. But beyond that, you know, I could recommend some Twitter people that are good to follow. And there's some names of people that I think know their stuff. So when they write about it, like, you can respect them. And I can give you some names. But beyond that, there's really no obvious choice just because it's written about so infrequently, particularly in the English language. There's better stuff in French media, but not in the English media.
Which will be a stumbling block for most Americans like myself who struggle with English, let alone learning a second language. I'll let you have the last words. What do you want to say to the audience? I'll let you close it out and any final thoughts you may have.
I think that the danger here is in thinking about Africa simply in terms of either this terrorist threat, or also another thing that people talk about is that, well, if we don't do something, then the Russians are going to move in, or if we don't do something, then the Chinese are going to move in. With regard to the Chinese, that boat has already sailed. Like, they are already the dominant players in pretty much all of sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily have political ramifications, because the Chinese are really focused on economic stuff. The Russians are nefarious actors, but their influence is actually very limited because they have very little money to put on the table. But the worst possible thing to do is to engage in any of these countries, to get involved in any of these things for the sake of fending off the Russians, for the sake of fending off the Chinese, or for the sake of some concern that people in Mali are going to organize terrorist attacks in New York City. I think that one has to think about these countries for their own sake and try to understand them in their own terms, and think about what to do to help them, and also what to do that's constructive in trying to engage with them in productive ways, because I think most of our engagement with them generally has not been productive. So there's a lot of room for fresh thinking about what can we possibly do. And ultimately, the people there matter, and their population there is growing. And I think that kind of approach is going to yield better results than if we were to just exclusively focus on taking out the jihadis or fending off the Russians. I just don't think either of those two things work. Since we're not really prepared to do enough. I mean, taking out the jihadis, like France tried, they sent a whole brigade and the French Air Force, and that didn't work. So we're not going to do that. And we're certainly not going to send even as much as a brigade, whereas you need to send more. So that's not going to happen. Yeah. Whereas also with the economic stuff, we can't even begin to compete with the Chinese. So forget about it. So find other ways. And so that's what I would sort of ask everybody to think about these countries for their own sake, these people for their own sake, and also know that Africa, when I talk about how what happens in Africa doesn't anymore stay in Africa, it's also not just the bad things, it's also really good things, because all these people, they're intelligent, industrious, they're inventing things culturally. We all benefit from, even sort of, as Trump would call, like shitholes, working better and being better, because there are a lot of really good people, a lot of really good talented people who have a lot to offer to everybody.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. I'll see everybody next week with an all-new guest and an all-new topic. See you then.
Was there ever a moment where they tested you with your own hand and saying like, hey, we might need you to do this? And were you questioning like, oh, I got to blow my cover here soon?
Yeah. There was not that type of activity, but other, I'll say, criminal acts that I was asked to partake in. When you're trying to earn respect, right, which is the biggest word in that world, you can't earn it by constantly rolling over and just taking everything from everybody. They'll push until you say no. That's for sure. Because I posed as a money launderer the whole time. You can't say like, I'm a regular Joe. And so I adopted a criminal persona, I would say, on top of the commercial cover. So I intersected with a lot of that world so I could do our operations, which was covert finance. I was moving Uncle Sam's money into places for us to use it. And I pretended that I was a criminal money launderer the whole time to facilitate that.
How did you gain enough trust for them to like, was it like, here's a little bit, let me see what you do with this, and then boom, let's go all in?
So that's a super fine line that you're trying to do when you're dropping the trail of breadcrumbs to get them to it. Because if you do it too much, they're going to say, well, we don't want to do it with this guy. He's got a big mouth. He just talks about stuff all the time, right? This guy's a joker. So you can't like just get drunk and bring it up one night. It has to be really, really planned out. And you just take advantage of the first time something comes up. We knew that one of the adversaries was hiring private investigators to check into people. And they would have like a female call up to a PI where they thought, somebody like I lived, and say, hey, I think, that my fiance's cheating on me. Can you look into this guy? And so it created an unofficial surveillance program against us. And so the idea was, let's take the Bureau's list of organized crime affiliated spots and start hanging out. That way, if the PI says he's going to come back and say, hey, I don't think he's cheating on you, but I do think he's kind of hanging out with some scumbags, and it would reinforce our story that way.
How many layers of cover is that? Like, how deep does that go?
So it is multiple layers of cover. It's kind of like playing four-dimensional chess at times. But the primary one is just the commercial cover that I was given, which I can't say specifically what that job was. And then on top of that, it was, we need to convince everybody that you're a criminal, and that's why you're doing this, not because you work for a government organization and things like that, right? So we're starting with money that's all stamped US dollars, right? If it's allocated to CT budget or whatever, and it needs to be, I'll say laundered, right? If it was illegal, it would be laundering, but distanced from the original source of the US government so that we could buy stuff or pay people or get money into places without the US government's footprint all over it was the goal.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this, but like, when you start to work with the CIA, like, we need you to act as this guy. Like, they help you with your whole cover, and then they tell you this is what we need from you.
The broad mission would be that I would routinely move our finances over to different places. So each individual mission would be, okay, this much money needs to get here to support, let's say hypothetically, JSOC stuff in East Africa. We got to get money over there. How it would break apart the missions. But mostly they all bled together because I had to run a network of entities or a network of financial accounts that they could dip into whenever.